Welcome to the Three Little Pigs podcast. I'm Shannon.
I'm Wes.
I'm Jackson.
And today we're going to talk about all sorts of myths. Working in the fitness industry, there's a lot of myths, misconceptions out there, and it's hard to...
A lot of charlatans.
Exactly, a lot of charlatans. And it's
Between
hard
myths.
to and real evidence-based practice. So we've got a list of myths that we thought of and that we're going to talk about. First and foremost, we brainstormed the biggest one that we see as trainers, especially working with women, is the fact the myth that weight training makes you big and bulky. So, Wes, why does weight training make you big and bulky?
Well, I think an issue is people associate looking big and bulky with very high competitive level of, like, usually bodybuilders or powerlifters who are in most cases on performance enhancing drugs to start out with. And so they had this conception that if I strength train, I'm going to look like that, which is not going to happen. But also a lot of weight loss primarily comes in the form of proper nutrition. And so I would suggest, from a practical standpoint, get yourself into a caloric deficit and strength train to maintain as much lean mass as possible. And if you're a novice, you may even be able to get quite a bit stronger in the process. I don't know why that misconception seems to keep popping up. But yeah, that's what I see. What do you see?
It's kind of hilarious and insulting that people think that you like pick up a weight for a week and look like Arnold.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been doing it for like 5 years, and I still look like a paler Patrick Starr.
Yeah.
You know,
It's pretty accurate.
but I think this myth usually comes from women because they don't want to look like a dude. But the simple matter is that, like, you don't have enough testosterone as a woman to produce the same kind of training effects or adaptations that men do. Okay, even if you train for 10 years, you're still not going to look big and bulky unless, like, you start injecting some testosterone in your body. Unless you've got some really cool genetics, in which case go for it and get really strong. But I think, and you guys can probably agree with me, that women who strength train are usually extremely good looking as far as body goes.
Yeah, and I think that most women as well don't quite realize the amount of calories that they would have to intake in order to actually get, air quote, bulky. Because most women, from what I'm seeing, typically aren't eating enough when they start training to actually recover from their training sessions. Like, we always have to have the talk, hey, you need to make sure that you're eating X amount of calories per day with X amount of protein per day in order to recover from these training sessions. And so, like you were saying, our main purpose in life is to be just walking meat trucks. Like, the fact that some women think that they can just come into the gym and then touch a weight for the first time and then all of a sudden they're 200 pounds. It's, I don't know where the myth necessarily came from, but it's an interesting one because it's really widespread.
I think with a lot of the clients that we've worked with in the same situation is they get this association that they want to lose weight. They come to a personal trainer like us who primarily deal in strength training. We start strength training, and they've made no adjustments to caloric intake whatsoever, and they start strength training, and either nothing changes from like a subjective appearance as they view themselves, or even the scale weight goes up potentially because they put on some lean mass, but then they haven't taken into consideration the nutritional side of things. It's much easier to create a caloric deficit with just reducing your calories than it is trying to, increase your amount of daily energy expenditure. I think it's a better strategy to try to do it nutritionally. And in many cases, and this is something I think a lot of people struggle with, is just, again, compliance to a specific nutrition plan or diet, and get that in check. And then, again, like we said, strength train in the meantime.
Yeah, and even if they don't adjust their calories, I rarely see weight go up, even with just adding in something new, adding in weight training. Generally, if it's new to somebody, weight tends to go down a little bit because it's, again, a new stimulus. And so, they're burning some calories. And the fact that they're beginners, they can recomp some body composition a little bit easier. They only really beginners can, lose weight and gain strength and put on muscle at the same time. So, yeah, Jackson, you look like you had something to say.
Well, one thing that I hear a lot is, when women walk into the gym, a lot of times I hear women say that they want to be toned. And I think that there's a misconception about like what that means. And it's funny because most of the time that means putting on a little bit more muscle mass and then getting lean to look like the person that you're talking about. And so like when I talk through that with my clients, a lot of times there's almost like a shock factor. Like, wait, so you want me to start barbell training like right away? And it's like, yeah, I mean, obviously this person has been, that's how they got the way that they're looking now. And it's interesting too, because I feel like a lot of women in particular will bring in actual like images of, people that they want to look like, or at least I've had that experience before, whereas I haven't had that experience with a guy before, and so it's interesting because they have like a visual representation of what they want to look like, when clearly that is a, strong, lean, muscular woman that they're trying to look like, but then they're scared to start barbell training.
Yeah. And it's definitely not just women either, not to single out women. It's more popular there, but I've worked with a lot of dudes that come in, they're like, yeah, I don't want to look like you, not that I'm huge, or yeah, I don't want to get big and bulky, I just want to, be able to
I wouldn't want to look like you either.
do whatever. and that's fine, but you got to understand that we train specifically to get big and strong, and we've been doing it for a while, and even then we're not that far into our careers as far as that goes.
Mediocre powerlifters at a local level.
Yeah. In Jackson's words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that segues well into another myth that we can talk about, as you mentioned, is kind of the rep range myth.
Yeah.
And the myth of the tone zone, as some would call it. High reps get you toned, whereas you start lifting under 6 reps or 5 reps and you're going to get huge.
Yeah, I think that this is an interesting one because for a really long time, I think especially when I started training, I was like in 7th grade, and I aspired to be a bodybuilder like Arnold, like I think a lot of young dudes do when they get into the sport. And you read about that all the time. And the more and more that I continue to look at the literature, especially Brad Schoenfeld's, it seems to be that if volume is equated, you could see similar hypertrophic effects at many different rep ranges, again, if volume is equated. So that would be, sets times reps. And so an example that you guys could think about is if you were doing 3 sets of 10 versus 10 sets of 3, I guess with the same load, which one would have more of a hypertrophic stimulus? And a lot of people immediately think, the 3 sets of 10 because you're doing 10 reps per set, when in reality, if volume's equated in the literature, it seems like there's no difference in hypertrophic effects.
Well, I know the weight couldn't be equated because even though the volume is, it has to reach past the threshold of like minimum intensity. And they have to be hard sets.
His newest one, yeah, I would agree with the hard sets. The threshold of intensity, at least intensity as in load on the bar, I think has almost not necessarily been debunked for hypertrophy, but his newest one that just came out, I think they're using like 30% 1RM, and they did it on hard, quote unquote, hard sets. And even that group, who had ridiculously low loads but very, very high volumes with very high level of effort, saw almost identical.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I think a lot of it goes into equated volume and relative level of effort.
Yeah.
Rather than just I think a lot of people. Now I don't want to say that higher sets are bad, because I think it's a good way to accumulate more volume in a time efficient manner. So one thing, something you could do is you could have, like 5 sets of 5, and then just keep increasing the amount of sets that you're doing to increase volume at a higher intensity. But, after a while, that it's relatively time consuming. And it's also kind of nuanced depending on where you are in your training cycle. But let's say you want to, increase volume in a specific training cycle. It may be, it might benefit you from a time aspect to potentially just increase the amount of reps doing per set, to get more volume in. So it could still be a useful tool, but again, if volume's equated and relative effort is equated, you can see hypertrophy gains across, I guess technically any rep range if volume's equated. So
Yeah, and so the myth would be that 8 to 12 is hypertrophy, and whatever 3 to 6 or 3 to 8 is strength.
Yeah.
It's not that separated. They're not that distinct or mutually exclusive as what Wes is getting to, and that's for strength, I think.
Yeah.
And for hypertrophy and for everything like that. It's just because you go to 7 reps or 9 reps doesn't mean it's automatically you're not going to get stronger.
And now I will say, of course, all of this matters with volume being equated, but if you are using, say you were doing, I don't know, we'll just go 3 sets of 8 just for a nice number. But if you're doing 3 sets of 8 and you're using it as a way to control calories a little bit more, then upping your volume, taking it from 3 sets of 8 to 3 sets of 10 could potentially be a way to do that, because it is just more volume in general. And I think that's where the misconception comes in, is people think that it's, also if you're trying to lean out, a lot of that has to do with your energy balance compared to just the training itself. And so I think people think, I'm going to lose weight, so I got to bump up my, I was doing sets of 8, now I got to go do sets of 12. And that's not exactly the case. There's a lot of other variables that, get you to be leaner.
I think another thing to consider too is we're specifically, just so we can get our terms right, we're specifically talking about hypertrophy right now. And hypertrophy is absolutely correlated to strength gains. In most cases, the bigger the muscle is, the stronger the muscle, the potential the muscle has to produce force. But from a practical standpoint, and you can kind of think about this in terms of, especially peaking for powerlifting, is our task is singles, and so it may, if not even as necessary, to program higher intensities at lower volumes, again, depending on where you are in a training cycle in proximity to a meet or a test, to be more specific, in most cases, to have better transference to that specific task that you're trying to, get better at. And so it's not to say that, don't ever do, I guess, lower volumes at higher intensities, because that's not necessarily what we're saying either.
It's all dependent on where you are.
Yeah.
In terms of your training cycle or being close to competition. I don't think there's any reason. This is a totally different conversation, but I don't think there's any reason you need to be in peak form to hit heavy intensities when you're 5 months out from a meet.
No.
That might not be the goal. It's not necessarily that you can't or that it's bad to, but it's not necessary that you need to be able to hit your heaviest weights then. But I think that wraps it up for that. You guys have anything to add to that, Myth?
That's about it.
Okay. So rep ranges, not mutually exclusive for strength, hypertrophy, and there's no such thing as a tone zone. Being tone is lack of body fat and having a little bit of muscle.
Having
obviously.
a state of resting contraction.
Yeah.
That's literally what muscle tone is.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Leave it to Wes.
It's the absolute definition of what it is.
The next myth we'll talk about, and this kind of, again, segues well, is the fact that when their goal is weight loss, people automatically think of cardio. They automatically think of specifically steady state cardio. Like, most people don't know anything about fitness. They want to lose weight, they're going to immediately go start running. Okay, in which probably one of the last things you want to do. But Jackson, you wanted to talk about this, so why don't you lead us off?
Yeah, for sure. So just from personal experience, this is actually how I got into the fitness game. I got fat, and so that's the first thing I started doing was running. And I think a lot of people go to running and steady state cardio because it requires no coaching. As far as you can obviously become a better runner, but you don't have to teach somebody right away how to run. As far as like if you go into a weight room and you see a barbell and a squat rack, people are intimidated right away because there's an element of I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. And so I think that the most important thing, again, can be repetitive, but it truly is the most important thing, is your energy balance, as far as make sure that you're burning more calories than you're taking in if you're trying to lose weight. And it has nothing to do with running, But you can use cardio and conditioning as a tool to aid that weight loss. But it's not because of cardio that you're losing that weight. You could lose weight without doing cardio. You just have to control your calorie intake, and you can still lose weight.
Yeah, I've had successful cuts, and I've had clients with successful cuts that do very little cardio or no cardio, because again, it all comes down to calories in versus calories out. On the other hand, I think cardio has some psychological benefits too. That generally clients, when they're trying to weight loss, they need to be in the state of mind that like, hey, I need to move more, because that just helps with that calorie balance in the first place.
Yeah.
But and just the act of, you know, sweating a little bit more, doing a little bit more, keeps them more engaged in the process, I think. And that's just the psychological side. But it's still always calories in versus calories out.
And Wes and I use that to our advantage all the time as well, where you can kind of play, you read your client. And so if our client is obviously wanting more, like they just have to be sweaty and they want to be beaten up a little bit, then that's when we'll put them on the Airdyne or we'll put them on the Prowler. And it's something that it doesn't take a lot of recovery resources. But by the time they're done doing that, they're like, wow, that was such a great workout. And they attribute their success to that. But in the big scheme, who really cares as long as you got them to their goal? And you can make them appreciate barbell training and dieting, through that entire process.
Yeah, I think that there are some, to everything, pros and cons to cardiovascular work. But I think, again, people's perception of its, importance. One, it depends on your goal or what you're training for. Even for powerlifters, it may be something to consider to include further away from, competition to increase, or with the idea of increasing work capacity. For someone who's trying to just lose weight, it may be a decent tool, not in and of itself, but a decent tool to, increase a calorie deficit. This is why I think a lot of bodybuilders like steady state cardio is at a certain point in time, it becomes very challenging to keep restricting calories. And so what seems to happen is they just go on really, really long walks, just to increase a calorie deficit. And so it could be a decent tool, but I think by itself, I'm immediately going to something like, running, especially if you're way overweight and you just want to run, may not be the greatest approach to the situation unless you absolutely love running and that's what you want to be for the rest of your life, is the best runner you can be. I think a lot of people do it because, again, they have the conception that, oh, everyone runs, so I guess what I can do is I'm, obese, I'm going to start running. It's like, well, hold on there a second. Let's evaluate the situation, try to come up with a better plan of attack.
Yeah, and then their ankles and their knees and their hips start hurting because they immediately, go run for. Well.
And even like Jackson said, running doesn't, at least an anecdotal experience with the people I've talked to, it doesn't seem like they're as intimidated to run as they would be barbell trained. And this could be a potential increase for risk because you get someone who is uncoached on running and they're overweight and they're not as intimidated to do it, and then they go out and do it with ridiculously high volumes. It could be a recipe for disaster. I'm not saying it's going to be causal, it's going to lead to it, but
there's no coaching involved.
There's no coaching. Yeah, you just go out there and start running.
Like most people, right off the bat, I've talked about wanting to do swimming as my conditioning, but I need to find a swimming coach because I'm intimidated to hop in the pool and just start swimming. Whereas that's why running I think is so appealing to a lot of people, is because they say, well, screw it, if that person's doing it, then I can move myself quickly until I'm hot, sweaty, and tired, and then theoretically I should lose weight, right?
I think a lot of people enjoy running too. Even when I was fat and I started running, and I liked it because I think when you're out of shape, you kind of feel like you're judged, even though a lot of people really aren't judging you. That's just your own perspective. You're really hard on yourself. You're your hardest critic, and by running or being outside, you kind of feel a little bit more isolated than if you were in like a physical gym environment where you feel like, oh my God, all these, fit-ish people are judging me. When in reality, that's probably not happening. You're just probably being hyper aware of your current condition, and are really sensitive about it. But yeah, I think a lot of people do it because they want to get started, relatively low, money. You just need a decent pair of shoes, and then you're relatively by yourself in the process, so you don't feel like people are watching you.
Yeah. On the flip side of the coin, we can talk about why strength training is more important than cardio when you're trying to lose weight. And for multiple reasons, in my opinion. And it's, first of all, weight loss by itself, just weight, like, isn't that great. What you're really looking for is a good body composition change. And that doesn't necessarily just mean losing weight. Because I've seen a lot of people lose weight and still look like shit. And it's because their problem isn't always just fat, it's the lack of muscle. And if there's nothing, underneath your fat, when you lose a little bit of fat, you're just going to look skinny fat. So that's one reason why strength training is super important when you're trying to lose weight. So you can build a little bit of muscle, and the goal is to look better and feel better after that weight loss. The weight itself is just a number. Another reason is because, muscle is just more metabolically active in itself, so it's going to help with that weight loss in the future.
Yeah, I think by strength training while you're trying to lose weight, you can maintain more of your lean mass in the process of weight loss. Especially, this could be something that's especially important for someone who's in bodybuilding or powerlifting, where if you're trying to diet for a specific weight class or get lean for a show, you're trying to keep as much muscle as possible. Yeah. And so by strength training, it allows you to have a better chance of keeping more lean mass than if you were just to diet without strength training.
This analogy, I think, works really well. I heard a long time ago from some bro in the gym, but I was like, actually, yeah, that does kind of work. He was like, steady state cardio is essentially you're training your body to be a Prius, where you can go long distances on a minimal amount of fuel. But strength training and weight training is like being a Ford Mustang, where you'll look really, really good, but you're going to utilize a lot of fuel. And so it's the most bro way of illustrating that, but it still does work. As far as strength training does have a metabolic effect that allows you to burn more fuel.
Or a dump truck in your case.
Yeah, exactly. A dump truck, or like a really, really old like pickup, flatbed pickup, a dually.
All right, that covers that topic. Our next myth is the good old muscle confusion, which is kind of nuanced.
Yeah, I'll start. So just right off the bat, your muscles don't get confused. Your muscles don't have little brains. I'm sorry, they don't. This is a side note. You can look into this more if you want. Motor modulation comes from your cerebellum and basal ganglia. You can look into that. We won't talk about that. But I think the idea of muscle confusion may have its importance, even though its idea is kind of wrong with the idea that your muscles are confused. So its name is not correct. I think it may have some relevance.
Its usual application for most bros is not correct.
Its usual application is not correct. So the idea, I think, or something to consider, is the repeated bout effect. So basically, the more you do something, the better you get at it, less sensitive you get to that stimulus. So that's why, over time, your progress kind of slows down. And by potentially changing either the goalpost or the amount of stress, you may have the ability to have some sort of novel effect of that new-ish stimulus. And so by slightly changing something like exercise variation, like frequency, volume, potentially intensity, by changing the goalpost, like peaking for a meet, you may see more gains, basically. But I think that's why, that's kind of the mechanism behind why it may have some merit, but it's usually applied wrong. It's usually applied all the time. Like I hear bros in the gym say, I never do the same workout more than once because I want to confuse my muscles. It's like, you're just a confusing human being. You're not confusing your muscles, and you're confused on the application of this specific principle. Like I get what you're trying to do, but it's not effective. You also need to get better at that specific stimulus via the said principle. So you need to practice something specifically to get better at that over time. But what do you guys think about it?
Yeah, I agree completely that it is, again, an intellectually planned out training program. Variation's good, and utilizing muscle confusion, if you want to call it that, is good. The general application, as you talked about with bros, is, it stems from, hey, if I do the same thing 2 weeks in a row or 2 days in a row, I'm not going to get sore. Okay, and really soreness isn't an indicator of anything other than like you did something new, whether that be new exercise, new volume, new weight, whatever. It's just something new, and it's not really an indicator of progress or anything like that. And as far as the problem with that, I mean, it's a great thing for them because they're having fun, blah blah blah, keeps them engaged in the gym. But the problem with that is you never get a chance to progressively overload a stimulus, as you said.
Yeah.
So if you never know if you're progressively overloading anything because you can't make progress in one simple thing.
Yeah.
So if you do a barbell row and then all of a sudden the next week you switch to a cable row or something, there's no gauge to measure your progress. And you're probably not making much progress because you're not getting efficient at the lift and progressively overloading that stimulus.
I think this is specifically true for strength training, as these are skills you're trying to acquire. I think in bodybuilding, the reason, not necessarily the reason, but if volume is a prime driver in hypertrophy and they're constantly changing the stimulus, they are still having higher volume, so they can still see hypertrophy. So, I mean, some of these guys are still, relatively big and in decent shape, but I still don't think it's an optimal way to train even for bodybuilders. But I think that, you could still get, technically you still could get hypertrophy from that. Especially for strength training, I think it's a poor idea because, again, you need to practice the specific test, to get better, or practice something that's going to increase your transference to get you better at that specific test.
So one thing that I think is really interesting is with muscle confusion, people think that it's good because it's always hard. But the reason it's always hard is because you never adapt to it and you're never good at it. And honestly, I'm going to go here, but this the main issue I have with CrossFit. Not saying that there's not good CrossFit boxes out there, good CrossFit coaches out there, but if you look at a lot of the WODs that are programmed, their focus is on constantly varying things, and so that they're hard. And you don't get stronger or your endurance doesn't get better. You work your butt off, and yeah, you can get leaner because, again, energy balance, but it really does put you in a weird situation where you're doing all this work, but you're not really getting good at anything. And I think that you need to have the mentality that just because you're hot, sweaty, sore, and tired doesn't mean that it was a productive training session. And I think that that's one of the main reasons why people think that muscle confusion works, is because you're always extremely sore from it. If you're changing the stimulus, changing the rep ranges, changing, whatever it may be, that's not a good gauge of progress, is how sore you feel that day.
Yeah. In defense of CrossFit, most people who do it just want a hard workout and they want to sweat and they want to have fun, and that's why it's so popular. Of course, also with the community aspect. In a training aspect, CrossFit as a training program, the WODs for a specific thing is trash.
Yeah.
It's terrible. But as far as giving a varied workout, that just is CrossFit.
Yeah.
No, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think too but that's also the issue, is that they claim that it builds the perfect beast, when in reality you can't build a perfect beast when it's random.
Mm-hmm.
Its biggest attraction is its biggest downfall of constant variation, which is literally randomness. It's a I guess more catchy term than random.
Yeah.
But constantly varied.
Yeah.
And that's also CrossFit at its most basic form.
Yeah.
Most boxes have other stuff where they'll work on skill work on the Olympic lifts for half an hour and then they'll do a WOD or something like that. It always depends on the coach, always depends on the box itself. And
that's why I flat out say too, there's some great CrossFit coaches out there, and I've talked to some really great owners of different CrossFit boxes, and it all just depends. But if you're wanting specific results, you need to train in a way that is not random.
Yeah.
And variation is not random. We calculate that exactly for the adaptation that we would like to see. It's not like we go into a meet constantly varying everything going into that meet. That would make no sense for a powerlifter. It would make no sense for any sport for that matter. Constantly varying something is like you're getting ready to play a football game, and one day you show up to practice and your coach says, "Hey, today we're going to play hockey." It's like, why would you do that? Technically, they're both sports. Hockey would be hard, but does that make you a better football player?
Yeah.
No. Varying it I mean, it's fun and it's hard, but it doesn't make you better at that task.
Mm-hmm. All right. So that was muscle confusion. Your muscles don't have brains. They can't remember anything either, but that's also another topic.
They are innervated by your nervous system, though,
Yeah.
which has a brain,
Yeah.
which is called your brain.
Yes. Your brain has a brain.
Yeah.
It is a brain. Next topic, which is kind of near and dear to my heart
Cookies?
as a future healthcare provider.
Pornography?
Pornography. Cookies and pornography. That's my new lifestyle brand at the same time. Took the bite out of the wrong hand one time. Anyways, the myth. Strength training is bad for your joints / dangerous / whatever else you want to put in there.
Okay.
Yeah, this is very popular, especially by the misinformed. Well, I guess anybody who thinks these are misinformed, but this one's especially popular. And it's a dangerous one because it's popular also in the upper echelons of education and healthcare.
Yes.
So some doctors will tell you that. Some chiropractors will tell you that. Some PTs will tell you that. Some professors will tell you that. Okay. And we're here to set the record straight for the 10 of you listening. It is not true. It is not true. So, and it probably stems from, people do get hurt doing it because they do it wrong, and then those people seek healthcare.
They constantly vary everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let's not bring CrossFit up again. But yeah. But yeah. So people get hurt when they lift, and they go to a doctor, and the doctor only sees hurt people, not people that have been doing it right, and have been doing it right for years. But anyways, Wes, you got anything to say on this?
Yeah, I think that one, when you look at sports as a whole, the injury risk and rate in weightlifting and powerlifting is relatively low compared to other sports. Really low. I think there's always a risk to reward for everything that you do, and I think the reward substantially outweighs the risk. Because we look at things like aging, for example, which is usually followed by, I guess along with like sarcopenia, osteopenia, potentially leading to osteoporosis, lack of stability, lack of independence, and a lot of these things can be increased, or I guess sarcopenia can, if you strength train, you can see hypertrophic effects, so that kind of takes care of sarcopenia. If you have osteopenia or osteoporosis, that responds well to loading. You can hopefully get that out of the way. Mobility seems to be an issue as we age, and working through a full range of motion under load seems like it could be a way to work through a full range of motion. So there's a lot of benefits. Also, it seems like a lot of these specific injuries, like osteoarthritis, for example, may respond relatively well to loading. Other things, maybe not so sure. I guess that's kind of nuanced on the specific type of injury, but the reward seems to continuously outweigh the risk substantially.
I think what's really interesting, relating this back to another topic, is how you hear this so frequently about strength training, but then no one bats an eye at running. Yeah. And, just from anecdotal evidence, we've seen this a couple of times where someone will strength train and then, maybe for 4 weeks, and then the weather gets really nice and they say, hey, I went on a 5-mile run, but I think that these squats are hurting my knees. And you're like, well, maybe it was the 5-mile run that hurt your knees, because your knees didn't have an issue until you did that 5-mile run. And so it's really interesting. Also, that people take, if you have an uncoached individual who hurts themselves while doing a lift, and then they say, oh, it must be the lift. Well, what about if you were just doing it incorrectly? It's like saying that swimming's not effective because you drowned. It's like, well, maybe he just didn't know how to swim, So
anything done wrong can go bad.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's not
Again,
offense against the actual thing you're doing.
Yeah.
I think that's, again, why it's important for whatever athletic endeavor you decide to do, consult someone who knows
Find
what
a
they're
coach.
doing. Find a coach, you know. And also, I think it's really important to find a coach to help you prescribe an appropriate amount of stress. So the example that Jackson just gave with the, hey, I'm going to strength train, and then when it's nice, I'm just going to arbitrarily accumulate way too much volume too quickly, and then associate that with, oh, maybe it's all the squats that I've been doing, when in reality it's like, well, prior to that, you were doing great and fine, and then, you know, a few days after that really long bout of, you know, I guess novel stimulus, you are now experiencing some sort of, you know, soreness or aches and pains. So I think it's important to get someone who can help you prescribe an appropriate amount of stress at your specific point in time.
So, an important concept to mention here is your body adapts to stress. Yes, for a newbie who's 135 pounds, soaking wet, trying to deadlift 500 pounds may hurt him, okay? But somebody who has progressed from deadlifting, say, 135, consecutively building up over time to 500 pounds, their body has adapted, okay? Their connective tissues have gotten stronger, their muscles have gotten stronger, and they're able to handle that load, okay? That's just an important concept for any kind of healthcare professional to realize, and they should know that already, is that your body has an incredible capability to adapt to stimulus.
Yeah. And I think, too, a lot of times people think of strength training and don't think of bones and connective tissue and joints. They only think about the, muscular system. But it has an effect on your entire body. And like you were saying, the entire system will adapt. You know, putting 500 pounds on your back for a squat, like you were saying, right away, is a terrible idea. But over time, the entire system adapts to the point where it's not just the muscular system that can move the weight, but it's a skeletal system that can support that. And all of that force can be transferred, you know, with the joints working the way that they're supposed to.
Anecdotally, just to finish this topic off, I just had a client the other day. I think I was hitting 500 for like a set of 5. I was like, man, that's incredible. He's like, be careful, you might hurt yourself. And again, it goes to one of those things like, well, you could hurt yourself doing anything. But the problem was he's associating weightlifting and heavier loads than he's, currently lifting with, oh, that's going to increase your risk for injury. When in reality, it's like, well, I've been training since I was in 7th grade, and it's not like the day one I came in and put a substantial amount of weight way above, my max, and then tried it. When in reality, it's like I've been, time and time again over many years, appropriately increasing the stress to where I am now, where I can handle that. And it's really not all that. I mean, relatively, for me, compared to him, it's not that heavy for me, when in reality, for him, it would probably be way over his, current max.
Well, and I think it's relative, too,
Yeah.
obviously. For him, like, that looks like a lot, and like you were saying, but if that's 85%, if 500 is 85% of your max, what's the difference in you doing 500 pounds at 85% and him doing 135 pounds at 85%? They're both the same percentage of the 1 rep max, technically. Yeah. And so it's interesting to see people's perception as like, they don't think about it in that sense as like, oh, strength is relative. So I don't know. I've heard that one a lot too.
Yeah. And I'll just mention some specific myths about it that are common. Squats are not bad for your knees. Moving your knee through a full range of motion is perfectly healthy. You can go as deep as you want, as long as other things, as far as form goes, are good. So squats is good form. Awesome on your knees. Deadlifts are not bad for your back. They might be if you pull with a rounded back. So don't do that.
Yeah, I would add to that too. I mean, with the literature that I've looked at with knee pain and back pain, it seems that the larger the musculature surrounding that specific joint, the less likely it is to experience levels of pain. So I think, even though I don't necessarily agree with Brett Contreras and his obsession with glute bridges especially, I think there's some merit to having, strong glutes that can help with back pain. I think it could be better achieved through squats and deadlifts, for more productive training volume, but I don't necessarily think glute bridges are a bad exercise. I just don't think they're as fantastic as he's kind of coined them and gained popularity for. But I think they're, again, the literature that I've looked at with increased cross-sectional area of the musculature surrounding that specific joint tends to lead to decreased levels of pain is something to consider. It's like if you could just get stronger and more musculature, you may experience, not always, but may experience less pain.
It's worth mentioning, just like in the last podcast we mentioned it, that pushing anything to the limits has risks.
Yeah.
But so does sitting on your ass and not doing anything.
Yeah.
Okay? The two extremes have high rates, of injuries, that kind of stuff. And that's sitting on your ass and, pushing it to the limit. But, one's a little more rewarding. The next myth, one of our last ones, is the importance or lack thereof of things like stretching, foam rolling, and really extended warm-ups before training, especially when it comes to strength training. This one, Wes is sure to mention some research. There's also some personal preference that probably goes into stuff like this.
Yeah.
But let's talk about it for a second. How important is stretching and foam rolling
So
and stuff like
with a lot of literature that I've looked at, it seems like a stretch is specific to the stretch that you're doing, and it doesn't necessarily increase things on a structural level, but it seems to increase tolerance to that specific stretch. So it's not generalized. So by stretching your hamstrings in one type of stretch does not lead to increased hamstring flexibility in a different type of stretch, but it increases tolerance in that specific stretch. But then let's talk about, okay, is that even important? And so when you look at things, you want to have some sort of objective, measurable outcome. Like, does it decrease injury risk? Does it increase the risk? Or does it increase recovery? Does it increase range of motion in the long term? And all three of these things, time and time again, have been like, no, no, no. So there's no decrease in injury. There's no increase in performance. And there's no increase in long-term generalized flexibility that's not just specific to the type of stretch that you're doing. So then people ask, okay, how do you get more flexible for someone who's like a gymnast? Again, this goes to the idea of, okay, you practice a specific stretch, and you get more tolerant to that specific stretch. So maybe in a sport like that, that could be something to consider. But in something like, powerlifting or any other sport, why do you need to be more flexible or mobile than the demands of that sport, especially if there's not going to be any increase in recovery or decrease in injury risk? So I think if anything, at least in our realm of sports, it's more of a waste of time. It doesn't really aid in any sort of benefit. I'm not saying it's awful. There are some things, even for static stretching, for example, prior to specific tasks, even like running and strength and power sports, there's actually an acute decrease in performance. So it's probably definitely not a good idea to perform some sort of static stretch prior. I still don't think it's a good idea to spend your time doing it after, because it's not really going to do anything. Foam rolling seems to increase, muscle viscosity, but no better than just a specific warm up. So the idea is, I'm going to increase, temperature to this muscle basically, and be able to easily work through a full range of motion, but it doesn't improve it any more than just a regular dynamic warm-up. So why not just be specific with your warm-up in a time-efficient manner? And if you're going to squat, why not just warm up with light squats and then work up to your squats, for that specific day? So again, my arguments mostly come down to there's no additional benefit. If anything, it's just going to increase the amount of time you spend in the gym. So why do it if there's no additional benefit?
Yeah. And I would agree for the most part. I think there is some benefits at some point, depending on if you may have an issue. Take foam rolling, for example. There is evidence that it provides acute benefits in terms of range of motion and pain relief, for that matter. So and some of that might be placebo, but the range of motion increase tends to be we don't know for sure, but it's generally probably controlled through neural effects, And if you increase range of motion acutely, but then load that movement and move through a fuller range of motion or an increased range of motion, you tend to keep that range of motion. Okay. Take specifically for, I can have a specific example. I have broken my ankle in the past, so I have limited dorsiflexion. Okay. Combination of foam rolling and eccentric loading has helped increase that range of motion. So if you have an issue and stuff like this has the possibility of affecting that positively, then I think that's benefits. I also think stuff like this can have psychological benefits. So somebody who finds a little bit of pain relief from hopping on a foam roller and getting under the bar and already feeling kind of warmed up and already feeling like this, that might have some positive psychological benefits while they're loading the weight. Like sometimes if I get in the gym and I'm feeling tight, I mean, I don't have an extended warm up, but if I'm feeling really tight and I hop under the bar right away and it just kind of feels like crap, sometimes I get in my head like, all right, this is going to be a crappy session, stuff like that. So if you get under the bar already feeling good, then I think you have a better chance to have a more positive mindset.
And I think that my stance is almost directly between both of you, where I think a lot of times the biggest complaint I hear is not having enough time to go to the gym. You don't need a long extended warm-up to be at the gym. But if you have the time and you enjoy that kind of stuff, which some people do, good. It's not necessarily going to hurt, and it's not necessarily going to help. So if you have the time, go for it. But the one thing that I do with all of my clients is make sure that we go through a thorough warm-up as far as whatever the movement is that we're going to be doing that day. We do multiple sets. We kind of look at technique, and then we slowly start loading that movement to the point where we get to our working sets. And for me, that's always how I've done my warm-ups, and it's always worked really well. And for the majority of my clients, that's worked really well too. It's interesting, like you bring up the psychological benefits. A lot of my clients will come in and, you can tell that they expect to stretch. And if they don't get any type of stretch in the beginning or the end, they kind of feel like they got gypped a little bit. So I don't have an issue adding in some, mobility work at the end if they think that it's going to be productive for them. I won't tell them, like, hey, this isn't going to be super beneficial. We just do it because it's not going to hurt them. It's not going to help them. But if psychologically they think it's helping, then good.
Yeah. I don't think there's ever any reason you need to do like a 30-minute warm-up or something like that. That's a bit ridiculous. But like doing something for 5 minutes, 10 minutes doesn't add much time, and there can be a positive benefit. There's no difference as far as like some people hop on a foam roller for like 30 minutes. Well, the research that is behind foam rolling obviously doesn't make any structural changes, but it does, again, provide some acute pain relief and range of motion gains acutely for like 10 minutes. But so doing that quickly, and you only need like, whatever, it's like, I can't remember the specifics, but like 10 seconds a few times is just as beneficial as rolling on it for like 20 minutes.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think the only thing that I would provide as a counter would be there would be no additional. There's no difference between doing that compared to just doing a traditional, or not even necessarily a traditional, specific dynamic warm up. So like you said, you step under a bar for a set of squats, and the first one doesn't feel good, and so you kind of get in your own head about it. Well, why don't you just do like 3 to 5 more sets with just the bar? And then see how it feels, and it's more specific. Again, this isn't going to make or break anything. It's just how effective is the specific thing compared to something else. I don't know. And again, if it helps with like athlete buy-in or it helps you psychologically prepare for the certain lift, then by all means, especially if it's not hindering you and you're absolutely fine with it, I see no reason why not to. I think that I think the reason I think from a practical standpoint, it may be wiser to warm up specifically would just be from most of the people anecdotally are on time crunch, and then some of the people I do see, and I used to be a victim of this. I used to even teach this is just, very drawn out, mobilizing with bands and lacrosse balls and all these things, and I almost think it's like me kind of being mad at myself for not being skeptical enough when I first started training to really kind of think about all these things. And it seems like I wasted a bunch of my own time in the past and a bunch of time of others doing stuff that is going to have no long-term benefit. And if anything it's really not going to have any sort of acute benefit if you don't do anything afterwards. You know what I mean? We'd spend like an hour doing it and be like, oh, we're out of time for the day, go home. It's like, well, what did that do? What did that accomplish? Nothing. You know, I just wasted a bunch of time and paid me for it. And so I think that's kind of why I've developed this stance, at least in my own training now, where it's basically get right to it. It also helps with time, you know, for me doing research and stuff. So
I think that there's a huge component of just routine.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason, like, I'll use the example of coaching, you know, junior high sports. The reason that we do the warm up and, you know, we stretch before games, we stretch before practice, but simply as like, you know, you can almost condition your players that this is zone in time. You know, this is, you know, when we start doing our stretching into our dynamic warm up, then it's, you know, of course, like I said, I don't tell them it's not, you know, going to make or break anything, but they know practice has started when that happens, you know. And so there is a benefit to routine when you get into the gym as well. And so I think that having that mental component can be very helpful as far as having a productive session.
For sure. I think that's a totally different realm too. Like for football, you need a warm up. It might not.
Oh,
it
definitely.
probably should involve stretching, but
Yeah.
for something that like you immediately hop into competition, you
Yeah.
need a warm up.
I think that's different too, because like you were saying, it gets you to routine, but it also helps with team camaraderie.
Yeah,
You know, just
sure.
everyone is doing this. We're all participating as a team. Yeah, that's a different topic, but
I wonder if, you know, like an extended warm up may help. Like if you have like say you're squatting, okay, and you have some compensatory pattern that may not be optimal for your squat because you have like a problem child somewhere. If doing an extended warm up to maybe get that moving a little bit better probably has some positive effects, because if you're compensating the squat during a specific warm up, you're not warming up what you need to warm up. So for me, for example, my ankle, if it's not moving well, I will overpronate, okay, and I will get knee valgus, so my knees will collapse. Okay. So, and I can't really do that in a squat.
why don't you just practice squatting without your knees collapsing?
What?
Why don't you just practice squatting without your knees collapsing?
No, it's a function of my ankle. I don't have enough dorsiflexion, okay? So your knee or your ankle collapses and pronates.
Yeah.
So then that goes like that.
Have you ever tried specifically warming up and potentially altering your mechanics via like stance width, toe out, or even bar position?
Yeah.
Okay. Again, it's one of those things, if you get a buy into it and you feel like it's actually working, and then the other question would be, to what, you know, objective measurable degree is it changing, and is it increasing performance or decreasing risk for injury?
True.
Yeah.
But it does have an objective increase in dorsiflexion, which for say a problem child, as a body, you have what should be normal ranges of motion for optimal movement. So if you're below that, you need to work on that. And just hopping into a squat doesn't necessarily do that, because it doesn't move that through the range of motion.
Is there, just kind of playing devil's advocate, because I haven't had any injury like that, have you noticed that there's any progress or improvement or any way to overload like the mobility aspect almost? Like, have you noticed that, you know, it takes less time, or that it gets better as your mobility goes on? Or is it something that, like you said, it's just a problem child that you got to fix every session almost?
No, it's not like it's every session. It's continually getting better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely do think it's interesting, and I also do think that this is why there are instances with acute trauma that we refer out to physical therapists for.
Yeah.
You know, I do think that when it comes down to someone with no real injury history, that's, totally healthy and can perform these movements right off the bat, then, you're not necessarily going to need the stretching or the mobility beforehand.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of what we're all getting at here. But there are incidences where acute trauma obviously can affect the body. And
it's not just a acute trauma either. I think what we tend to think like, yeah, pain-free, just go ahead and hop in a squat or a bench. There's certain, painful movements. So say your shoulder's hurting. There's certain movements or warm-ups that you can do that decrease that pain and allow you to bench more successfully. Like you go work with, say, Billy one time and your shoulder's killing you. Okay, a couple quick fixes, a couple warm-ups, your shoulder feels better. Okay, and then you can bench effectively.
Yeah.
So.
No, and exactly.
I think there's
To
more
my
to it than
point
just,
again too. That is for our realm. I think that's why we refer out. When you get to that point, and that's why we're not afraid to refer out either, or and say that we don't know when those incidents come up, because our job is to make people as strong as possible, and if there's something that's prohibiting them from being as strong as possible, then it's time to refer them to someone who specializes in that type of movement screening.
But to wrap up that myth, or I guess debate, you don't need to warm up or stretch for 30 minutes before, no matter what's going on. All right, that wraps up our top 5 or 6 or 4, whatever that was.
12, 11.
Training myths. Tune in next time for our top nutrition myths. This has been the Three Little Pigs podcast. See you later.
Deuces.